Welcome to Insights into Northeast Michigan, a WBKB News public affairs program. Insights deals with the issues affecting those within the community, as well as Northeast Michigan and the state. And now, Insights into Northeast Michigan.
Welcome to Insights. I'm Sherry Stewart. May is recognized as National Foster Care Awareness Month. Well, joining me to talk about Foster Care Awareness Month is Kathleen Schultz. She is the Foster Care Division Director for Wellspring Lutheran, which serves Alpena County as well as other counties. Thank you for joining me today, Kathleen.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Kathleen, I recently read that there are 14,000 children in foster care in the state of Michigan. And your agency does a lot of heavy lifting in this area. Educate us on the foster care process. How do children end up with your agency, and how do you help them and families that are looking to be foster families?
Yeah, so youth who have been removed by protective services are placed in foster homes. So kids will either come to us right at the time of removal as protective services has intervened and removed the child from the home, or sometimes they're transferred to us from other agencies if they need to move a child and they don't have a home that maybe fits the child's needs. They'll reach out to other agencies to see if somebody has a home that would be able to meet the child's needs.
Mm-hmm. Now, is it difficult? I've read, there's many places in the country where there is really a significant need for foster care families. Is that the case here in Michigan?
Yeah, it's always the case. There are lots of children entering care with various needs, and different families are able to meet those needs differently. So generally, there's a need just for families in general, but also to meet some of those specific needs, whether it's medically fragile children that have more difficult or severe medical concerns. And so we look for people who maybe work in the healthcare facility and are a little more comfortable with those needs. We have children with challenging behavioral needs based on maybe past traumatic experiences, children with educational needs that are more severe. So, and then teenagers, anybody who is willing to step up and take teenagers and help them become more independent is always a need as well.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. So there is a long process, I understand, to becoming a foster care family or foster parent. Walk us through the process. So there are certain requirements, there are certain background checks. So if someone watching and they know that they want to be a foster family, a foster parent, what is the first step that they need to take? What do they need to do?
So the first step is really to identify an agency that you want to complete the licensing process with. Whether that's a private agency or with your local DHS office, it's really just sort of what fits the family's different needs based on location or, things that they could offer to the family as far as support. So the first thing to do would be identify an agency and then call to inquire about the licensing process. Mm-hmm. And just ask any questions that you might have. Even if you're not ready to start the process right away, just get some of those questions answered. And then once you complete an inquiry, then they will usually schedule an orientation. And that's a time for you to come in and sort of see the agency, meet some of the staff, learn about the agency's history, the services that they offer. They'll go through what the licensing process will look like. And then they'll go over some various licensing rules that were required to provide education on upfront prior to the beginning of the process.
Now, what is the difference between a private agency, as you said, and MDHH and the state, essentially the State Department? So what is the difference? Are there certain different guidelines, or are there different services? What is the difference between the two?
Nope, so the guidelines are the same. Private agencies are just contracted to essentially help because there is such a large need to service kids in foster care. So we follow the same rules, same licensing guidelines, everything is essentially the same. It's just, we're doing the same services, but maybe just a little bit different as far as support we offer or location, flexibility, things like that.
Mm-hmm. Essentially helping with the heavy lifting since there is such a need for foster care families.
Absolutely, yes.
And so once you've gone through the, I guess, the orientation, asked some of those important questions, what does the next step look like?
So once a family decides that they want to officially move forward, then they'll sign an application. And that really starts the information gatherings part of the process. So families will be scheduled for fingerprinting because criminal background history checks are required. So they'll have a state police clearance, fingerprinting, which is the national, medical statements, social assessment, just really, gathering all that information about the family in addition to like an on-site home visit. Because there are requirements about how big bedrooms need to be, how many people are in the home, basements, water hazards, things like that that would need to be evaluated and discussed.
Certainly. Now, what are some of the things that would prevent people, obviously outside of criminal background history, what are some of the things I believe some people have, I guess, a misunderstanding that I don't know that you necessarily have to be married. Is there a certain age limit if you are interested in becoming a foster care? What are some of the limitations?
So you do have to be 18 years or older, and there is a financial benefit to being a foster parent, but it's not intended to cover all expenses that caring for a child requires. So somebody would need to show that they're able to meet their financial needs or responsibilities prior to those payments. So there is an income portion of it that is required. But you don't have to be married, you don't have to own your own home. So it's really, I think, more flexible than people realize, which is why we always encourage people to call and ask those questions that might be, causing a hesitation where you think maybe you didn't qualify, but you really do.
Okay, so you said there is no age limit. Of course, you do have to be 18, obviously. But on the other end of the scale, is there a cutoff in terms of?
Nope. There's no cutoff. The state does require that you have a medical statement. So a doctor would need to state that you don't have any medical concerns that would prevent you from appropriately caring for a child. And so there's technically no age cutoff. You just have to demonstrate that you're able to care for the child.
Very good to know. Well, Kathleen, we will take a quick break and we will be back to talk more about Foster Care Awareness Month and talk about some of the benefits of giving back to the community in this way by becoming a foster parent.
Insights will return after these messages.
Welcome back to Insights. We're continuing our conversation with Kathleen Schultz talking about Foster Care Awareness Month. And Kathleen, if you had to give a commercial or produce a commercial on recruiting families to be foster parents or families, what would you say? How do you actually sell this to individuals that are kind of on the fence?
So foster care is an extremely rewarding experience. And I think if you're willing to open your heart and your home to help a youth and support the family in an emergency or a temporary situation, then please consider foster care or at least ask questions to see if it's maybe right for you.
Now, you said an emergency situation, so I guess sometimes the situation could just be for temporary. You may just be a foster parent for, a couple weeks?
Yeah, absolutely. It could be a couple days, a couple weeks, a couple months. There are times where they just need a little more time to investigate the situation, and there's an immediate concern for safety, and sometimes those things can be resolved in a matter of days.
Now, how old are the children? Are they age out, I believe it is at 18 that they're no longer in foster care?
Yeah, so there are some different rules depending on the child's legal status, but about 18. So they can sometimes enter care days after birth, and then they're able to they can extend their stay in foster care through the Youth Adult Voluntary Foster Care Program, which has some eligibility of either working or going to school, but it allows them to stay connected to some of their supports while they continue to gain their independence.
Now, I know earlier you were talking about some of the payments that financially you need to be able to show that you can actually provide for the child. What, though, do some of the payments look like to families? Do they get their basic needs in terms of like clothing, or what type of stipend would families be looking for?
So there's a daily stipend that families would receive for having a child in their home. There's a clothing allowance twice a year for spring and fall to help with some of those, with the clothing needs. most medical expenses are covered by Medicaid or if a child has private insurance. So it's not intended to cover everything, but it does cover the most basic needs.
Some significant, important needs that are covered.
Yeah.
Okay. And you said those are monthly payments for the?
So it depends on the agency and how that payment is structured. But so the rate is daily. Some agencies issue that financial reimbursement twice a month. Sometimes Wellspring is monthly. So those are things that, foster parents or potential foster parents would want to ask, depending on the agency that they go through.
Certainly. And so your commercial, you said certainly it's a rewarding way to give back to the community to help a child. What are some of the children? Have you seen any children that they've actually come out of foster care? What are some of those anecdotal stories that you can share with us?
Yeah, and I think they range. There's a youth who just made a connection with a worker and saw that somebody was looking out for them, and that they carry that, for the rest of their life. There are youth who recognize the situation they were in was unsafe, and they appreciate being placed in a more stable placement with caregivers who are looking out for their best interest. And there are youth who really recognize the work that everybody is putting in, including their family, so that they're able to return to that family unit.
Now, what about if you want to adopt children? How does that work? If you have a child that's been in your home and you see an opportunity to adopt the child, what is the process there?
So if you have a child placed in your home and they become legally available for adoption because parental rights have been terminated, then the child is referred to an adoption agency and then assigned an adoption worker as well as a foster care worker. And that person would go through the adoption process. If the child's placed in their home, then they do have the option of stating whether or not they would like to be assessed for adoption. And if they indicate yes, then they would, it's very similar to the licensing process. There's a home study. You have to provide very similar documentation. And then the adoption agency would make a recommendation to the state because at that time they're the child's guardian. And then the state would either be in favor of that recommendation or deny the recommendation.
And are there many cases where the situation leads to adoption?
So the reunification rate in Michigan is just over 40% right now, and has been over the last few years. So the other 60% don't necessarily be adopted. Sometimes guardianship occurs, or they're placed with a relative long-term, or they age out of care.
Okay, now what is the difference guardianship then? You're just not in foster care. Is that living just with an extended family member? Is that the difference there?
So guardianship is sort of like a less permanent form of adoption. It's through the court system. It's reviewed annually. You have the same rights as a parent, a legal parent, but it's not permanent like adoption is.
Okay, I see. Well, Kathleen, what are some of the myths, as this is National Adoption Awareness Month, what are some of the myths about this whole process that you believe that people should know?
I think some of the myths are that you have to have the perfect home and the perfect family, or that you have to have a lot of money, or that you have to own your own home or be married, all of which are not true. I mean, there are lots of different circumstances that we work with, because if people are willing to foster, then we certainly want to do what we can to facilitate that.
And then I do see a question here, some information here. What is the home study? Is that the review process of the home to make sure that it is adequate for a child to come in under the foster care system?
Yeah, so the home study is the whole assessment. So it's the social assessment where we're talking about past relationships, education history, beliefs about parenting techniques, willingness to collaborate with the birth parents, in addition to an assessment of the physical structure of the home. So that's where we really put everything all together when we make our recommendation.
Kathleen, we're going to head to break, and when we come back, we'll talk about some of the training that you have to go through if you are interested in becoming a foster family.
Insights will return after these messages. We are
are continuing our conversation about Foster Care Awareness Month. And Kathleen, we were talking earlier about the process of becoming a foster parent, a foster family. Once you've gone through the process in terms of the fingerprinting, the background check and all of that, what is the training that you actually go through? How do you get trained in knowing how to provide the best care for children that have been entrusted to you?
So as part of the licensing process, prospective foster parents will be referred for PRIDE training, which is Parent Resource for Information, Development, and Education. And that will cover various things from childhood development, milestones, expectations, parenting techniques, behaviors, dealing with different situations. And it's facilitated by somebody who's familiar with foster care, and so can also provide those sort of real life experience and expectations to help prospective foster parents be prepared for that.
So, for example, if say you have a foster child and it's just not working out, maybe it's a personality conflict, what then do you do? How do you mitigate that situation?
So the first thing we would do is just ask that they inform the workers, the licensing worker and the foster care worker, so that we could come together as a team to talk about what the foster parent's experiencing. And our first effort is to implement supports into the family, whether that's therapy or family members that might be able to help out, provide respite. So that the child can spend some time, with different people that they have a connection with. And if that doesn't work out, then the foster parent could request that the child be moved. But really what we do is sit down together as a team to brainstorm to see, is there some way we can resolve the barriers that are in the home.
And so in terms of the training, do you have to have any type of prior experience, say in childhood development or anything working with youth? That's not a prerequisite?
No prerequisites as far as training, just the PRIDE training is part of the licensing process. And then there is an annual requirement for training, as long as it's related to caring for a child. That must be completed annually.
Now, how long is the PRIDE training? Is it several weeks? How long is that training? And what does it look like? Is it after work or is it online? What does it look like?
So right now it's online, and I think a lot of agencies are going to continue offering online sessions because it has been so convenient. But agencies try to be very flexible with how it's being offered. So it can be sometimes spread out over 2 weekends, a full day Saturday and full day Sunday for 2 weekends in a row. Sometimes it could be broken up into evening sessions for 3 or 4 hours, a couple of weeks. The initial part of it is 12 hours. It's broken down really into a few different segments. And so the initial 12 hours needed to be completed prior to licensure, and the remaining 12 hours can be completed after licensure. But agencies are very flexible with offering training. We can even offer it in the home one-on-one if the agency can't accommodate the family's schedule with what they already have scheduled in the group sessions.
Now, is it a one-time, so say you go through the training, you go through the background check, you complete the training successfully, and say you have a child that's placed in your home, the child is reunited with family. Do you go through training again, or do you wait for another child to be placed with you if you choose to have another child in your home?
So the PRIDE training just needs to be completed the once, but there are required training hours that need to be completed annually as part of the relicensing process. So every 2 years, the license needs to be renewed. And so certain requirements need to be met, but part of that is ongoing training. As long as it's related to the care of a child, then it counts. And so sometimes foster parents find trainings on their own, and sometimes licensing and case managers will help identify areas that maybe that they could benefit from some training.
Okay, so some ongoing training and some hours that need to be completed.
Yes.
And what is the benefit for the trainers? Certainly, is it just how to relate to children, or what are you learning in the training? Is it conflict resolution, or again trying to relate to children that are not your own? What do some of the modules look like?
Yeah, so it's really, it could be anything. So one thing that we really encourage is trauma-informed parenting, which helps people understand that sometimes trauma is really what's driving those behaviors. And so it's not just a child who's acting that wants to be bad. There's some other things going on. And so being able to recognize that and develop some techniques in the home to help de-escalate children and then be able to communicate about it afterwards so that there's still some learning going on. It could be about different mental health things that could be happening, or medication, really anything that relates to caring for a child. It doesn't have to fit into one box or another. It could be anything that the parent could benefit from learning.
And what type of support do you get? Is there a individual that the parent or the family would call on a daily basis or regularly? What type of support do you get as you, open your home to a foster child? What type of support can you expect?
So the foster parent would be assigned a licensing worker who would be sort of responsible for managing the home and the rules that they need to follow, but then they'll also have a case manager who's assigned to the youth that's placed in the home. So both of those are great supports, but you really have the support of the whole agency. And so every agency has a crisis line. So if there's an emergency that's happening or a foster parent really needs to get a hold of somebody, they can always reach out to that emergency line and speak with somebody about what's going on.
Well, Kathleen, I think that we're just about out of time today talking about Foster Care Awareness Month. We do want to thank you for joining us to provide this great information about people that are interested. If someone is watching and they do want to become a foster care family or parent, they can contact your agency directly?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, again, Kathleen, we want to thank you for joining us to talk about Foster Care Awareness Month.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, that does it for this week's Insights. If you have a question, comment, or story idea for us, you can email it to news@wbkb11.com. Thanks again for watching. I'm Sherry Stewart.
Insights into Northeast Michigan is produced by WBKB News. This has been a production of Thunder Bay Broadcasting Corporation. All rights reserved.